Hello, my name is Martha Dillon and I'm the editor of It's Freezing in LA, which is a magazine about climate change. And today I'm interviewing Sîan Berry, who is the Green Party co-leader and candidate for the London mayoral elections. Hello, Sîan, how are you doing? Where are you joining
Hi.
us from?
Really, I'm here in my flat in Camden, in Kentish Town, and yeah, really nice to be here. It's really good to be able to talk about it with a wider audience and to have a proper in-depth chat, which I think is what we're going to have today. So that's great.
Great, I hope so. Yeah, well, why don't we start with Camden? I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what are your priorities as a councillor in Camden, and as a council, what do you try and do to make Camden a more green place for its residents and workers?
Camden is a very green place, actually. I mean, it's kind of, chicken and egg situation. It's a green place, so they've elected green councillors for quite a long time now, since 2006, and we've had quite a lot of climate type action going on in Camden over the years. I used to be in a group that was based on the Agenda 21 commitments that came out of the Rio summit in 1992. That's we've had an active group when I first started getting involved in Camden, and we were quite an early council to declare a climate emergency. We were, I think, the first council to hold a citizens' climate assembly. And now we're working on the ecological emergency and pushing on that. They've been slow to get rid of their pesticides, which is just really annoying me and other campaigners, because they could just do that. And we're working on the sort of more detailed plans now of how to do things in Camden. And it's really nice, actually. The local paper, the Camden New Journal, did a wraparound and a proper eco edition of their paper last week. And got people to write articles for the outside, the wraparound, that were as if it was in 30 years' time and we'd solved everything. And that was really nice. It was like a real hopeful for the future edition. I really liked that. And inside that, I had to write an article. And in that, I focused on two things that had been slightly left behind. And one was solar panels on roofs. London is way behind the rest of the country on this. Camden, there's a few flagship things. There's some really good community action, but we haven't hardly put anything on top of our council buildings so far, and that's just like not good enough. So pushing on that. And then demolition and embodied carbon, which I'm slightly obsessed with at the moment, in connection with all kinds of things. So we're talking about, the stuff in the things that you have around the house, the recycling, the lack of targets to reduce consumption bothers me an awful lot. And supporting things like repairing and reusing is something I've been working on for years. So those are my two big shouts at the moment in Camden.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that in the context of buildings, because obviously you've done a huge amount of work on affordable housing and London's housing crisis. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on how we, meet the housing targets and make sure people can be homed in an affordable way, but also not have the huge footprint that building new buildings require for materials and construction. How do you balance those two things?
That's a really interesting question, actually, because even the big housing campaigners tend to focus on build more homes. And that is part of the answer. We do need to be putting new buildings wherever we can. I'm much keener on things like infilling the gaps that there are within cities, making sure that all the spaces near public transport, the well-connected spots within cities aren't wasted, that things are done in the most efficient way possible. But I'm very against demolition, and this comes out of years of campaigning by people in London against the wholesale demolition of estates, which absolutely breaks up communities, has huge social impacts, but also has an enormous climate and carbon impact, because those buildings they're not that old usually. They were built of concrete. They had a huge carbon footprint when they were built. And so knocking them down and starting again is just a waste, when these are pretty solid structures. You could, if something was absolutely run down at the very last resort, you could still reuse the structure of that building to rebuild. And in most cases, the arguments for demolition are really poor. Like, the buildings are not that run down. They've just been left to get scruffy to try to make the case for demolition. Often that's the hidden agenda, is that the big developers want to get hold of sites and profit from them, not that that's the best thing for those communities. So out of that campaigning, the call from architects, which is relatively new, and it's relatively new, studying the overall carbon impact of things, and they've only just got around to it in the last few years for buildings. The architects have started a really good campaign called Retro First, And I'm very, very in favour of this, because architects are the right creative people to have campaigning on this and then working on it and looking at how we do retrofit to make things as green as possible, and how we save demolition, how we save from doing demolition by reusing buildings to make new homes. So that's the forgotten part of the housing crisis answer, is reusing existing buildings. And the other part of it, which is outside of the green sort of envelope a little bit, is I'd like to see more homes coming back out of the private rented sector into what is more social housing and council housing, getting things at controlled rents within the private rented sector, and then bringing things into proper living rents. And that involves, you know, redistributing the homes that we already have to be more fair as well.
Yeah, and very linked to what you were saying just about sort of objects as well, you know, reusing what we have properly and making the most of the massive amount of materials we've already mined and played with, to keep their value with them. And what about you? Sorry.
Oh, when we're talking about a climate emergency, of course, you know, knocking something down and starting again takes more time, takes more effort as well. You're more likely to get planning objections to a whole new building. So when we're talking about a climate emergency and a housing crisis, you want to be getting on with things as soon as possible. And this seems to me like the most efficient way to get on with solving our problems.
Yeah, and a similar argument for sort of wind turbines as well. They're much quicker to build than lots of alternative power sources. I was going to ask you, sort of mentioned in terms of, you know, refurbishing housing stock. A huge challenge in the UK, because we're quite a cold country, is obviously heating, but it's massively expensive, even if it's better for the environment to insulate all our homes and transfer our heat power sources. How do you suggest that councils can be best supported, or in turn support their residents to do that affordably?
It's really, really tough, and a lot of councils have struggled with this. We can't do, like in the general election when I was standing to be like the Prime Minister and we were putting forwards our, you know, what we'd do if we were the government, there's absolutely no argument here. You should be borrowing at a government level and investing in your housing stock, and you get the health benefits back from that. You get the reductions in fuel poverty, which reduce the amount of outlay there has to be from the government. You get social benefits, you know, you meet your climate targets. So in a governmental terms, when you are the Chancellor of the Exchequer and you're collecting, well, you're also collecting the VAT from the work that gets done. So your Green New Deal absolutely pays for itself. At a council level where you're not the Exchequer and you've got to sort of do the projects on a more in and out in the shorter term basis, that's actually more tricky. But we've had green councillors up in Kirklees, which is Huddersfield, for a very long time, and they've done a really good job of putting forward ideas like a rolling fund to help householders and investing street by street. So you do all the houses on one street that are similar houses, they were built at the same time, they need the same work doing all of that at once, free of charge, and then just recouping some of the costs back from the homeowners later. That kind of work has been done and has been done very successfully. So there's no reason why councils can't learn from that and get on with projects like that. You do get the money back in heating bills, and councils manage large amounts of council homes. They can work out ways of doing it. It's just they've never really been incentivized to do it. So you need the incentive of green councillors going, oi, that's the incentive that councils really have got. Whereas, yeah, the government hasn't been really doing a good job of pushing this onto councils to do, or giving them targets or incentives or funding to do it.
Yeah, and a lot of crossover there with what you're saying about moving people from the private sector back into the sort of council managed space, of having proper infrastructure where people can actually do work on huge numbers of houses at one time, being very important.
Yeah,
and
organisation, as we've seen with the coronavirus crisis, how you organise things is almost as important as the actual measures you put in, and simplifying how you organise things is really important. So I've been talking about basic income as a better way of supporting people than lots of different support systems for the people on welfare, or people on who are self-employed, or small businesses. You know, this is just very complicated. A basic income would save you an awful lot of time and effort in organisation, as well as be a fairer thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of going back to housing, and you touched on it a little bit there, could you talk a little bit more about some of the benefits that people can see from green housing policies and living in more sustainable homes? What sort of other things will they see in their lives as positives from that?
Well, I mean, another element of green housing policy, and this is, you've got me onto my favourite topic, and so I've got lots of different things to say, is that we want people to have more control over their homes. And I think that's one of the areas where people, particularly I think younger people, the sort of millennial generation, so you say, but this is people up in their 30s now. They've never really experienced any real control over their homes. They've often been private renters, they're stuck in private renting. They've been made to get used to the fact they don't have real rights to decide, real control over the costs. And that is a little bit depressing. When you ask people, should we have rent controls, you actually get a higher level of support in opinion polls from older people than from younger people. And I think it's because younger people just don't realize it's something they should have. It's like that's what would be right. They just think it's impossible, and it's just all market forces. So we want to promote more cooperatives and more community-led housing to build more homes, so that there's more control over that by the people who live there, so there's more democracy within how decisions are made, and that's just incredibly important. And in terms of mental health and well-being, the benefits of being in control of your life are just immeasurable, essentially. So you get all these practical benefits from the Greens of lower rent and better repaired homes, cheaper homes to heat, less cold, less damp, less mold, genuine health benefits there for everybody, but also just more empowerment, more feeling of being in control of your life, and that helps people an awful lot too.
Yeah, really, really thought-provoking. Thank you. And we're keeping these really short, so I've got one last quick question, which is...
my answers are not short so far, are they?
No, they're brilliant. My last question is, do you have a favourite building in London, and do you mind telling us about it, or one of your favourites?
Oh, I'd love to. So yes, I mean, I love all the low-rise housing estates that are just brilliantly designed as neighbourhoods. So places we've been trying to save from demolition, like Cressingham Gardens, which is near Brockwell Park in Lambeth. The council have had their eye on that for ages. They've been trying to make an excuse to knock it down, and the residents there have done a great job of banding together, trying to use every bit of the law that they can to win their rights. We've won them a ballot, and just really as part of from the mayor, so they'll have a final say, and this just all really helps. But it's such a wonderful place. It's brilliantly designed. It's it's not a building, it's a neighborhood, and it's traffic free, so you go in there and there's gardens, there's community center, there's you can walk up to all the front doors, and so there's little corners where people have got their own bits of garden to tend. It's just brilliantly designed, and I think we should really treasure those spaces and try to duplicate them when we're creating new neighborhoods as well. We get a lot of identikit blocks of flats at the moment in London, and I think we should do these more individual, better designed things. And then I'm also a bit of I'm a shard convert. You know, when I first saw the shard and the plans for the shard and how tall it was going to be, I was just like, that's stupid. But actually, because I travel all around London for my job, and I don't now because that's banned, but in my previous, in the previous times, I was able to travel all around London. Whenever you can see the shard in the distance, it fits in with the view, because there's always like a church spire somewhere in the in the middle distance or near you, or that's the same scale as the shard in the view that you have, and that actually really works for me. And I go up to Highgate, my ward, which is up a hill, and you look down and there's the shard, and it's among the landscape in a way that you wouldn't have imagined when you think about exactly how big it is. I think it's better than I used to. I've come around.
That's nice. Yeah, it's a homing signal for me. It's living in South London. If I'm in North, I can always find my way back if I can see the shard.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sîan. Do you have anything you'd like to leave our watchers with in the last couple of minutes?
And hopefully you like some of the ideas that I've said. Go and read the rest of the Green Party's policies, because we've got a great philosophical basis. We've got lots of really nice things to say. And whenever you get the chance, whenever there's an election, whenever we next manage to have one, please vote Green.
Great. Thank you so much, and have a lovely day.
You too.